Good morning and welcome to this year's Environmental Science Careers for Change Environmental Science Careers for Change online event. My name is Elizabeth McClellan and I'm currently the Seeding the Future Program Lead at Bush Heritage Australia. I'm thrilled to be joining you today from Menang and Bibbulmun country here in southwest WA, and I would like to acknowledge Menang and Bibbulmun Noongar traditional owners. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present and welcome all First Nations people joining us today. Further, I would like to recognise that the environment, ecosystems and landscapes that make up the incredible environment we're aspiring to protect are on stolen lands in this country which have never been ceded. I encourage you to use the Zoom chat function at the bottom of your screen to say hello and let us know which country you're joining from today. You can also post questions anytime during the webinar, and we'll get to these during the Q&A session. For those of you who may be new to Bush Heritage, we are a leading conservation not-for-profit protecting ecosystems and wildlife in landscapes across the continent. We buy, restore, and protect natural landscapes. We work in partnership with traditional custodians and with farmers and other landholders to deliver positive biodiversity outcomes in our priority landscapes. But rather than go into any more detail about Bush Heritage, we've got a brief video that will introduce the organisation to you.
Over millions of years, our ecosystems have evolved to support billions of diverse species. They bring an irreplaceable beauty to our world, sustain us and enliven our curiosity. Here in Australia, our unique ecosystems allow animals and plants found nowhere else in the world to thrive, one of which sparked the beginning of Bush Heritage Australia. In 1991, our founders raised the funds to purchase 2 forest blocks and prevent them from being sold and logged. A dedicated community was born, and our mission to heal and protect the bush. Over the years, Bush Heritage has grown into a leading conservation not-for-profit. Now our impact spans the continent and its waters through our vast reserve network and partnerships. We apply science and the knowledge of Australia's First Nations people to guide our actions and build resilience into our landscapes and restore habitat for precious wildlife. We see possibility far and wide and walk in harmony with First Nations people and our agricultural partners to make sure our on-ground impact is deep, collaborative and long-lived. Working from one horizon to the next, for the smallest ant and the tallest tree, for you and those who follow in your footsteps. By 2030, we are working towards an ambitious plan to deepen and double our impact. This work is made possible by our supporters. With your help, we can achieve these ambitious targets. Our life and our future depend on these complex ecosystems, and they depend on us.
In the context of this webinar, Bush Heritage also plays a leading role in providing practical training and learning opportunities to inspire and support the next generation of emerging environmental science and conservation professionals. Our Seeding the Future program has a number of pathways for emerging professionals who are considering or actively seeking a career in conservation. We support the recruitment of early career professionals who can learn and hone best practice skills in a supervised environment. Seeding the Future has a number of pathways, including tertiary student placements, paid internships, and research collaborations for honours, masters, or PhD students. The increasing awareness of environmental issues, coupled with the need for professionals to address them, is driving the demand for environmental scientists. Jobs and Skills Australia projects a strong growth in employment for environmental scientists, with the number of positions expected to increase by nearly 8% in the next 3 years alone. The multidisciplinary nature of environmental science also offers great career progression and lateral movement between industries and contributes to a long and fulfilling career with boundless opportunities for growth and change. That is why today I'm so excited to see hundreds of students joining us online, and I know our presenters are eager to speak to you all. So enough from me, let's kick off with our first presenter. And I'm going to hand over to Ben Lake, who is the Bush Heritage Reserve Manager at Uradi Reserve, about 600 kilometres north of Perth in WA. Welcome, Ben. Take it away.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm calling in from Uradi Reserve on Nunda Country. Like Liz just said, about 6 hours north of Perth. I'm here to tell you a little bit about my convoluted career path. Now that's us there. I was lucky enough to grow up in Kalbarri, which is about 50 k's as the crow flies, in a wicked little town called Kalbarri. Good fishing. Pretty good diving and good surf, and that's just by the bush. So being that, I spent most of my childhood either on the ocean, in the ocean, or next to it, or in the bush. Looking for frogs, doing what kids do, climbing trees, which is pretty funny because we don't really actually have any trees. Resulted in a lot of broken branches, but that's what it is. I guess living where growing up where I do, drove my early interest in nature. If you can't appreciate little frogs that don't need water to lay eggs or carnivorous plants there, I think you're probably missing out. But I did all my schooling here. I was lucky enough to do distance education, which for those of you who don't know, I used to fax my assignments to my teachers, which it's a skill I'll always have, but I don't think I'll ever use a fax machine ever again. But I was really lucky to have some good mentors and some good teachers at that school. And it's always a roll of the dice for that luck that they were able to foster my knowledge and my interest in the environment to a wider extent. But after year 12, I had a gap year, which I think was really important. I did a few random jobs, including being a deckhand on a boat, which was fantastic, going fishing and getting paid for it. You love it. But I went to UWA to uni in environmental science, which was pretty broad. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I went to uni, which is, I think, all right. I knew what I didn't want to do, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I always enjoyed plants, so as I did a few more units in botany, I kind of found myself going towards that. I was lucky enough again to have some good lecturers who were interested and interesting enough to get me into into that plant science realm. Also in the Southwest Botanical Province, which is really species diverse and really cool. So it was great to be able to have that in my backyard to do. So look, after I finished my undergrad, I wasn't quite finished with academia yet. So I jumped on an honours project opportunity, and it was in fire ecology. And who doesn't like burning stuff, really? And look, it was really interesting. Taught me a lot about fire ecology and how complicated it can be. But honours wasn't really academia wasn't really for me. Like I said, although it taught me a lot, scientific method and that I just found something that I didn't really want to do. And that's kind of fair. But after that, early 20s, had a bit of a quarter life crisis, which led me to pretty much uproot my entire life and go travelling for a few years. And during that time, I had so many different jobs, from scrubbing toilets, planting trees, to pouring beers. Look, I eventually ended up in a ski field, as you do in Canada. And that's where I met a girl. And the funny thing about Canada is that you don't actually meet Canadians on the snowfields. You meet Aussies. Anyway, she was from Victoria. And a long story short there, I ended up moving to Victoria after a bit, and living down the Surf Coast. For those of you who know, it's just down on the near Torquay, Geelong kind of way. And I was doing, again, more random jobs. But by that time, I felt as if I needed to get back into environmental science. So I started volunteering and applying for internships and jobs in the realm. And I was lucky enough, again, luck is a thing that continues up, to get I was lucky enough to get an internship at the Conservation Ecology Centre, which is another non-for-profit that applies scientific principles for best practice in landscape management. And was lucky enough to be involved in some cool projects there, including feral animal research, re-veg, fire stuff. So it was good, nice and varied, and gave me a good appreciation for a bunch of that stuff. Look, and then this led me to full-time work in NRM. I did get a job with them, but I utilised my past experience in construction and landscaping, and rolled that into with ecology. Sorry guys, I forgot to change my slides. So rolled all this into helping build a wildlife park. So if anyone's been down there, Wildlife Wonders is a 30-hectare predator-proof enclosed fence with a bunch of cool stuff running around. When I started there, it was pretty much just a paddock with a few trees in it. We helped build everything, but it really helped. Not having all this random background stuff to kind of go through it all. Now that lasted a few years, and it kind of finished up, and I ended up having a kid, as you do, and me and my wife, she is now, ended up travelling to going for a holiday to come back to WA. That was 3.5 years ago, and counting. So we'll see how we're still here. So it's always fun. Because of my work with machinery and in that very, very landscape, I got a job here at Urardi with our re-veg partner, Carbon Positive. There's another non-for-profit. That's another theme. Go through. Because of my experience, I got a job doing seed collecting, and that evolved into doing field work here. I got along with a team that really well in bush heritage in the Midwest. And that ended up being casual employment, then full-time employment. When the current field officer, when the current manager left, I stepped up and I'm doing his job. Well, it's my job now, but but my overarching job is really to manage conservation management activities here at Urardi. Easy to say, but that's really broad. For example, this week I've been on the tractor a bunch, doing direct seeding of some of our natives. Been organising visitor trips, a bit of weed control, and I was up in the roof before doing some plumbing because no one else is going to come out here and do it for me. And last week we were up at Hamlin Reserve, which is another reserve just north of us, doing some burning. A little cool video here of some of this hummock grassland. And this is one of the low-intensity burns which we're doing to create heterogeneity in the landscape and to help, help improve this senescing spinifex, which is really old and hasn't been burned, and do that to help protect it and to hopefully provide that bit better a habitat for things like the skinks and mice that kind of grow. And then look a bit more on the re-veg project. I've included a picture of my tractor there. It's all plants and animals pretty much, but I also love being able to drive my tractor around. It's a big part of my job that I still get to do very varied activities. But Urardi re-veg project is pretty unique. We're in a really marginal area, and which right on the edge of the wheat belt. It was cropped for almost 30 years. And about 6 years ago, our partner, Carbon Positive and Bush Heritage, started putting plants in the ground. Since that 6 years ago, we've done almost 800,000 plants. I wasn't responsible for all of them. I was probably only responsible for 200,000 of those. But yeah, I mean, it's really challenging these environments to work in. One year we only had 65 mil of rain, which is not much. Pretty much the whole of the country's got more than that in just a day since then. So lots of learnings and stuff like that, but it's really where my interests lie, and really important in bush heritage and for Eurotti. But kind of moving on from that, I really hope to stay here and to develop my skills, and to collaborate and to work more and more, learn more. There's 650 species of plants at Eurotti, and I want to learn how to do a lot with them. So, look, I'm really important. It's really important, I think, including species like Eucalyptus speediana, which is a threatened species, sandwood, which has cultural, economic, environmental importance that isn't really included in ReVeg. I love doing those projects. And look, everyone in this, everyone in environmental science has a different story, and it's not one size fits all. It is really really important that you just find your way, learn as much as you guys can about the things which you're passionate about. For me, it's plants. I love it. I could talk to you hours about it. And look, if you want to work in the environment, get those practical skills, guys. And yeah, look, comes down to luck. And and good luck. And thanks for joining today.
Thanks very much, Ben. That was fantastic. And some themes there that you picked up on. I guess you can say you were lucky, but you also did what you said, had a broad range of interests and then spent a lot of time getting kind of, maybe at the time didn't seem related skills, but they actually all add up. The other themes that I picked up was the power of volunteering. I can recommend that to everyone on this call thinking of a career in environmental science. It's a fantastic way to get into the sector, and the power of internships, which is great, which is what our program is all about. So thank you for that. I'm now going to go on to the next presentation, which is from Sophie Holt. Now, Sophie brings over a decade of hands-on experience in Indigenous protected area development, in ranger operations, and community-led conservation planning. Sophie is currently project manager for culturally relevant climate adaptations at Bush Heritage. I'm going to hand over to Sophie now to tell us what this role entails and also the career path that led her here. Over to you, Sophie.
Thanks very much, Liz. So good morning, everybody. I'm calling in from the beautiful Quandamooka country on Moreton Bay. And as Liz just mentioned, I'm the project manager for a new Bush Heritage Australia project, which is centrally focused on working with traditional custodians to develop climate change adaptation strategies. I'll just outline a little bit about my early days. I had a passion for nature that really stemmed from where I grew up in the bush, off-grid, in a house that was built from materials from the land. So as I was growing up, I would go out with my parents and collect rocks in our property from which we built our house together. And so I believe that I had a strong place-based education at home where I learnt to respect and read the bush from family and friends, whilst also, receiving that mainstream education through my schooling. But as I was growing up, I began to develop an awareness of a lot of environmental degradation and threats that I would see around me. And these were steadily eroding the values of the place I felt so connected to. I would see logging of forests, growing weed infestations, and more invasive animal species, as well as an absence of right-way fire in the landscape and an increase in hotter and more intense bushfires, which, as I was growing up, continued to threaten our way of life and the plants and animals around us. I also observed changing climate and shifts in the seasons, and increasingly developed an understanding that to help country, we need to help people. So in terms of next steps, I really had a lot of passion and a lot of anger about a lot of the threats that I was seeing and how the country around me was becoming so threatened. And I decided that I needed to channel that passion into study. I undertook a Bachelor of Arts at the University of Sydney, majoring in anthropology and Indigenous studies. And I wanted to problematise colonisation and Western society's structures and values that have historically driven destruction of country. I also wanted to learn as much as I could from Indigenous Australian culture and value systems. This then led me to study a Masters of Development at James Cook University in Cairns. After my university days, I was really looking for a practical way to apply what I had learnt in a university context. I undertook a number of internships and volunteering experiences, and these were immensely invaluable for me. Some of my favourite ones was volunteering in Yullamu community in the Central Desert, where I worked as a community support officer role in a sport and rec program during a school holiday period. That was just an amazing time to be able to be out on country and living in my very first Aboriginal community that I had ever spent time in. Another really invaluable volunteering experience was with WWF and Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service, and that was undertaking a baseline population survey for the endangered northern bettong. Sorry, I think I've messed up my slides here. Sorry. The northern bettong, which you can see in the top right-hand corner of the slide. And that was my first real kind of field-based conservation volunteering experience. The last volunteering experience I ever did was again with Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service, and I was very fortunate that this experience then led me to gain my first full-time job as a ranger for Queensland Parks and Wildlife, which was a dream job and something that I had thought about a long time as I was growing up, but I never actually thought that I would be able to get there. And so that was kind of a peak moment for me. And then from that, everything else seemed to flow. So from that time, after getting that first job with QPWS, I was then able to gain some other really exciting roles. One of them was as a field officer with the South Endeavour Trust on one of their nature reserves, which is in the south of Cape York. After that, I was able to then go and work across in central West Arnhem Land, which was amazing. Amazing time out there working with the community, the local traditional custodians. And that was like, again, such an incredible experience. I learnt so much, and I was really there in a role to support traditional custodian management of country and to follow the healthy country plan that had been developed by traditional custodians out there. And it was, amazing. And from that experience, I was then able to gain other roles. So things kind of just flowed after that at that point. And I found that I'd really found a space where I felt I could use my skills to support Indigenous management of country. So then went on to take a role working for Wutiti, traditional custodians for Northeast Cape York Peninsula, as an Indigenous protected area coordinator, where I was able to apply a lot of the skills that I had learnt over time to achieve the dedication of the Wutiti Indigenous protected area. And then, of course, after that, gained employment over in the East Kimberley with Wanna-Bulgambra Aboriginal Corporation as a ranger coordinator. So I'm just going to play a little video that was from my time working with Wutiti up on the Cape. And it's a video of an amazing beach cleanup that we undertook that I helped to organise with the Wutiti people and also Tangaroa Blue. This is just one of the projects that we worked on while I was employed with them, and it was a really amazing collaboration. We removed over 10.8 tonnes of marine debris off the beach along a 2.8 stretch of the coastline. We even used we used the helicopter to sling in a buggy because there was, large amounts of marine debris getting washed up on the beach, and we were able to then use that buggy to help remove a lot of the larger pieces of debris that had washed up, big ghost nets and fishing gear, and as well as items from overseas, a lot from Indonesia. And it was such a great project because it was really supporting the Wutiti people's ambitions, to really be leading and managing their own country, but also bringing in partners like Tangaroa Blue and Reef Clean to help clean up country and also implement their IPA and Healthy Country Plan. So my current role with Bush Heritage, so in general, Bush Heritage has a really strong focus on partnerships with traditional custodians on reserves, but also off reserve on Aboriginal owned lands. The map on the right-hand side of the screen shows a lot of the groups that Bush Heritage works with around Australia. So myself at the moment, I'm managing just one project, the Culturally Relevant Climate Adaptation Project. The key aim of this project, as I mentioned before, is really to support traditional custodian-led climate adaptation planning. So it is like a First Nations-led planning process that is similar to something, say, like Healthy Country Planning or IPA planning. And the key aim of it is to develop culturally appropriate climate adaptation strategies and produce climate change strategic document for each of the traditional custodian groups that we'll be working with. Some handy hints from my journey. Like Ben's journey, my journey has been non-linear, like it definitely hasn't progressed in a straight line. There's been some frustrations along the way. I think, and overall I ended up spending probably over a year volunteering in an unpaid capacity, and that I found hard at the time, but it was also so invaluable because I was able to gain a wide range of experience from a lot of different sectors, and I was able to travel to a lot of different places to complete those internships and volunteering experiences. I recommend building a community of people around you. These are your people that are your mentors and people that you look up to, the people with knowledge that are working in the space that you aspire to be. Don't be afraid to go remote. There are so many opportunities out there. And it definitely broadens your horizons. Different pathways are okay. A big takeaway point for me, university can build knowledge and skills, but there's also so much knowledge that can be found in other places. And I've definitely found that in the work that I've done in supporting traditional custodians across Australia, and also be persistent and never give up hope. And thank you so much for listening and taking the time to join this webinar today.
Thanks so much, Sophie. That was an amazing journey. And I think some of the themes that resonated with me there again was the follow your passion and have I guess, a picture in your head about where you eventually want to go, or at least a broad direction, because then the sort of the twists and turns and the frustrations and that you can put into context of what you think you would like to achieve with your life as a whole. So fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. And our final presenter today is Caleb Trayer, who recently completed a paid internship. We're talking about internships a lot today in hollow-dependent fauna, in the hollow-dependent fauna project at several of the Bush Heritage Reserves in Victoria. So one of those internships that Seeding the Future program offers. We were fortunate enough to have Caleb join us. And so over to you, Caleb, to tell us about it.
Morning, everyone. My name's Caleb, and I'm calling in from Wadjuk country, and I'm here to share a little bit about my path into conservation. I've loved the bush and wildlife ever since I can remember. I have really fond memories of running around in the Perth Hills, catching skinks and chasing red-tailed black cockatoos. And I think my passion for wildlife and my curiosity for ecology was really sparked in those early years of spending lots of time outside in a beautiful part of the bush. But when I couldn't get to the bush, I was at the zoo. And even as a kid, I was really inspired by Zoos Victoria's fighting extinction programs. I think they do a really good job of giving everyone something they can do in their day-to-day life to help protect wildlife. And that's something that really resonated with me. So I decided when I finished high school, I'll study science and try and become a zookeeper. But when I got to university and I got to my ecology subjects, something just clicked, and I guess I became fascinated with how all these different species and landscapes and systems interact and how ecosystems function as a whole. I started to think a little bit on a bigger scale and realized that I didn't just want to care for individual animals in captivity. I wanted to be out in the bush and try and protect some of these species in the wild. And really, that's what led me to ecology. I knew I didn't have the skills or the experience to be a field ecologist, but I did know that I'd learn best from spending time with experts in their field. So that's what I set out to do. I volunteered as much as I possibly could. I volunteered for uni students, postgrads, lecturers, NGOs, community groups, and government, and was able to gain hands-on experience conducting a bunch of different field survey methods, but also expand my understanding not only of some of the conservation issues that we're facing as a country, but some of the real-world conservation solutions. I found a lot of these opportunities online through places like the Deakin University volunteer Facebook page, and really just reaching out to organisations whose work I believed in. And that's how I found Bush Heritage. I started out as a volunteer doing tree planting and camera trapping and bird surveys. And really that volunteering led to my internship and now a role within the team. A little side note, you don't actually need to go to Deakin to use their Facebook page. I didn't go to Deakin. There's a lot of really good opportunities on there. Use it. Careers in conservation can be incredibly rewarding and exciting. I think it's one of the few industries that allows you to organically find your own kind of niche areas of interest and speciality and use that knowledge and those skills to make a positive impact on the planet. But it can also be an extremely challenging industry. The reality of fieldwork requires time away from home, long days, late nights, and working in some pretty extreme weather. It can be a confusing industry at times, and the path forward is not always structured or clear. But that said, I believe that there's space within conservation for everyone, whether you're into data, or comms, or tech, or animals, or people, for business, finance, social media, whatever it is. We need all of those skills within conservation, and I would urge you to try and find yours. I feel so incredibly lucky to be able to spend time on country and work in some of Australia's most beautiful and ecologically important places, and all the while to be surrounded by so many unbelievably passionate and knowledgeable people, all towards the goal of protecting healthy country forever. Over the last 6 months, I've been working on a hollow-dependent fauna monitoring program. So I go out by myself or with volunteers and conduct spotlighting surveys. So we grab a head torch, a thermal imaging scope, a bat audio recorder, and a speaker, loaded up with all of the owl calls that might be present on the property. We surveyed 35 different sites, recorded 630 fauna observations, and of that 630, we recorded 29 unique species. Some of these species include the Crefts glider, the white-striped free-tailed bat, and my personal favourite, the owlet nightjar. The owlet nightjar is the smallest nocturnal bird we have in Australia. They feed at night on a variety of insects, and they have those two black bold stripes extending over their head from the top of their eyes. I love them so much because they're chatty and they're brave. They'll come sit down on the ground next to you. I remember one night we went out and it was maybe 11 p.m. at night, and for the first time since we started doing surveys, just started to sprinkle with rain a little bit. And I'm not entirely sure why this happened. I assume it's because all of the insects responded to the rain and they all started to come out at once. But the entire forest just lit up with nightjars. They had this alarm call that they do to each other. So the entire forest just started screeching from every direction, and it seemed like every tree we looked at with the thermal scope had another one. It was kind of hard to keep up with writing them all down. They were flying so close, we could feel the wind from their wings on the top of my head. And that was a really special night for me, because I think it's a really good example of the numbers that these populations can bounce back to if we give them a chance. We used the data that we collected to work out not just which species were present, but just as importantly, which species were missing. We worked out that we don't actually have enough large, deep hollows to support a population of barking owls. So let's fix that. I was able to recommend the exact number and placement of artificial hollows that would need to install to make the entire property suitable barking owl habitat. And that way of thinking, that science-based decision-making, is part of the reason why I love bush and why they're seen as industry leaders in conservation and land management across the country. They're really experts at going out and conducting really good science and then turning around and putting it to use. I've been really impressed by how well bush combines a science-based approach while being grounded in cultural knowledge and partnership. And that's something that I want to continue being a part of. I've stepped into a role within the agricultural team at Bush Heritage, which means I'll be leading an annual fauna monitoring program for an area of Northern Victoria called Turnip Creek. We're going to be working in partnership with farmers and be trialling different land management techniques, not only to get the best output for sustainable agriculture, but with the focus of getting the best biodiversity outcomes possible. And I guess you could ask, why is this important? Well, Australia is roughly 55% agricultural farming land, which means that as conservationists, we can't solve the entire country's ecological problems within our reserves. We need to be able to work in partnership with everyone across the country to be able to get the best for everybody. It's a super exciting space with a real potential for impact. To any early career conservationists out there listening, I'll give you 2 pieces of advice. Number 1, be very specific about what you're aiming for. Find a job title. And I know that's terrifying, and it's definitely going to change, and it should change. The job title that you pick is not actually that important. It's more of an exercise of getting you out the door, meeting new people, learning new things, and exploring your interests. So if nothing jumps out, that's okay. Make your best guess, but find a job title. And then find a job description for that job. And underneath, you'll find selection criteria. And you need to go out and try and tick off the selection criteria one by one. And make sure that anytime a job with that title gets published online, you have evidence, you've got all of the boxes ticked. And then 2, just get out there. I've had some of my most meaningful experiences through volunteering. I've met people who truly inspired me and was able to be part of something bigger. As Sophie mentioned earlier, there's a whole world of conservation work out there, and we need all the help we can get. So just get out there, help out, meet some cool people, and do something good. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Caleb, and really that your little story about the owlet nightjars, we could feel ourselves, I'm sure, the whole audience there in the forest with you. Beautiful storytelling, which is, I guess, another thing that everybody in this session has brought to this webinar is just the power of communication. People have talked about volunteering, internship, good mentors, getting out there. The other thing that conservation really needs is good communication. So just along that line, make sure that you put your questions in the Q&A for these fantastic presenters for when we get to the Q&A section, because it's all about communication as well as conservation. And right before we get to your questions, I'm going to go down another communications rabbit hole and give you a shout out about the new season for our Bush Heritage podcast, Big Sky Country. Across 6 episodes, we'll explore how biodiversity can tackle climate change. Now, the first episode of season 3 dropped on Monday, so it's hot off the press. Check it out wherever you get your podcasts. And I've got a short video here to get you all excited to listen up to these podcasts.
I'm Tiani Adamson from Bush Heritage Australia. And in a new season of our Big Sky Country podcast, we're asking, how can biodiversity help us solve the climate crisis? Join me as we travel across this magnificent continent, its waters and islands, in search of the answers to the biggest questions of our time.
We are defending a planet that gives us everything.
Big Sky Country, Season 3. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
Fantastic. Okay, so now it's time for the Q&A. And we have a couple of questions come in already. So I'm going to send maybe the first question to Ben, but possibly part of the answer is it depends, because the question is, are there any minor licenses that you suggest, as in manual driver's license, heavy vehicle, specific big bush management courses? Anything you might suggest there, Ben? And take yourself off mute.
Sorry, team. Computers are very important. Um, no, but yeah, manual drops. People who want to be out there in the environment. Yeah, manual driver's licenses are still really important. Things like full driving experience, not necessarily courses, but experiences are really important. Um, yeah, I mean, landscape management, is a lot about weed control and stuff like that. So chem certs and experience with those type of things can be really really important and useful in job finding jobs and stuff, particularly out here.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, some practical skills never go astray, as does random, job experience on ski fields and things like that. This is a particularly good question, the next one, because we do see a lot of really amazing candidates every time we recruit for jobs. So somebody has said, how can we set ourselves how can I set myself apart, say, from other applicants in this field in competitive areas? Maybe Caleb, since you're very close to the sort of the coalface of starting your career, you would like to put some thought to that?
Yeah, I think taking every opportunity you can to try and meet the people within the organization is great. So whether that's showing up to events, I know lots of different NGOs do like movie screenings or public-facing events, even if you can't get out and volunteer with the projects they're working on, just find excuses to talk to people that work there and meet people, and you're going to get along because you've got the same interests. So just get out there and talk to people in any way you can, really. That's what I'd say.
Thanks, Caleb. And I'd also add networks are very important. So as Caleb said, volunteering and internships are a great way to gain networks. And they often lead to opportunities because people already know you and know your skill set. But additionally, the volunteering, I can't stress highly enough that a lot of times if I'm recruiting and I have people with similar qualifications, people who've actually taken the time to go out there and volunteer and add some extra skills to their skill set and some networks, really stand out. So the questions are coming in thick and fast. There's another one that I might answer quickly. From a recruiter's perspective, what are your thoughts on employing international students or graduates? At Bush Heritage, we need to, people we employ have to have the right to live and work in Australia. So we don't tend to employ from overseas and then organise visas. But after that, if you do have the right to live and work in Australia, but you have overseas employment, or you come from overseas and you're the best candidate for the job, absolutely. Overseas experience is often really interesting, brings new perspectives. That said, once you're here, I would again volunteer and get some local experience so that you can also say that you've got local experience. I've got a question here about maybe because Sophie's qualifications are a bit different. Do you think a Bachelor of Arts, a major in geography and environment with no background in ecology, how would you recommend they apply for a conservation-related job? Do you think they could do that, Sophie, and what recommendations might you have?
Absolutely. You can definitely work in conservation and not have a degree in ecology. I don't have a degree in ecology. Of course, having qualifications in ecology would be helpful, but from my perspective, there's lots of other roles that you can take on in conservation organisations where you don't necessarily need that hard science background. There's planning roles. There's roles like the one that I am in at the moment, which is about supporting traditional custodians and traditional custodian knowledge. There's definitely lots of opportunities out there, and those are just a couple of different roles, just to name a few. And then, of course, as Ben really mentioned before in his presentation, getting out there and gaining a lot of practical skills is also really valuable. Go out and get your tickets. You can do certs in conservation and land management at TAFE as well, which are really quite practically grounded and will put you through a lot of those qualifications that you might need to gain, say, a job as a ranger or equivalent kind of a field officer role. So yeah, there's many different pathways and avenues that you can take. So don't feel like you have to tread the linear or well-trodden path that you might think that you have to.
Thanks, Sophie. Here's a question for Ben. What effects are you seeing from climate change at Euryadi and WA in general?
Yeah, that's a big one and a hard one. I mean, we're pretty marginal here. So we have good years and bad, but like I said, my preso, a year with 60 mil of rain, it really isn't very much. So those extreme weather events of extreme heat and dry are probably becoming a little bit more, more general. This year has been, really cold. So yeah, I was seeing those extremes be more extreme. The heavier rainfalls in shorter periods of time. So the bush is probably changing a little bit, but we'll see in a couple of years. It is pretty resilient. So hopefully it doesn't reduce our biodiversity too much.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, so there's another question here about Caleb has already mentioned Deacon's and Bush Heritage's volunteer register. Are there any other recommended useful databases for volunteer and internship opportunities? I might hand over to Caleb and Sophie to give a bit of a couple, but certainly the one that I do recommend keeping an eye on is the Ecological Society of Australia. Their website often has volunteer and internship and job opportunities, so that's pretty useful. And then NRM Jobs is another website that has some often opportunities. But Caleb, maybe you have any others that you can suggest?
I was going to say NRM Jobs as well. But like I said in my presentation, you would be surprised how often you can get volunteer opportunities out of just reaching out and asking people. I got a couple through ARI and DECA from just finding someone's email and just asking them if they need any help. So, find someone who you think is doing good work, and then just send them an email and ask. Any ideas, Sophie?
I would also add to those great points Liz and Caleb just spoke about. Something that I found really useful was the Aurora internship program. So I gained 4 internships through that program, and they're a really wonderful organisation. Back when I finished uni, they were really about supporting a lot of organisations that had signed up to take on students, and those organisations were, Wet Tropics Management Authority, the Sacred Sites Authority in Alice Springs, Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority. A lot of the land councils have signed up to them. Some grassroots Aboriginal corporations have signed up to receive Aurora interns. So they're really about bridging that gap between university studies and placing students in a meaningful workplace environment where they can contribute to the outcomes of the organisation that they're placed within. something that I found really amazing. And although they were unpaid, they did support travel to certain places as well. So it could be worth looking them up as well.
Fantastic. Thanks both. And we'll put links to a lot of those opportunity networks in the chat afterwards. We've got a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to apologize in advance that we won't be able to answer them all on the call today. But I'm going to take the next one. What classes, study areas would you recommend at university that helped you guys get better experience and knowledge for working in this field? Would anyone like to answer that one?
Yeah, I can have a go.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, look, for me personally, it was what I was interested in. It was plants, and knowing, getting to know that. Although university obviously isn't be all and end all. I'm in NRM, so I drive tractors and do stuff like that. So I really want to emphasize those practical experiences, things like TAFE or just stuff like that. That's not necessarily tertiary education. I would think really important.
Thanks, Ben. I think in your degree, get the basics of your environment or your conservation subjects. But thinking laterally is often quite interesting too. Some social science degrees, statistics, courses in coding or programming never hurt. And then, really, the volunteering and the internship experiences to get a little bit of that practical knowledge of how to apply it in the real world. I've got a question here, which I think might be for Sophie. As a mature-aged working professional in social science, what's the best advice to begin the intersection of social science and environmental science? I hold a social work degree, but my heart has always been in conversation and cultural partnerships of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. What is the small step I could take into internships or volunteering? You might have answered some of that already, Sophie, but...
Thank you for that question. I mean, I think the biggest piece of advice that I would have from my experience is that I haven't let a certain location restrict me. If I've seen an opportunity that is remote, that isn't somewhere where I'm currently living, I've always moved for that particular opportunity. And that, I think, has probably been a part of who I am. Like, I love adventure. I love going new places. I love learning about different cultures from different places. And that would be the biggest piece of advice I could give, is just, don't be afraid to, if you're able to, obviously, depending on your circumstances, travel to certain places to take on these kinds of opportunities that might come up that aren't necessarily available in the community or the area that you're currently living in.
Thank you very much. Now, I wonder who wants to take this one. How do you continue to stay positive in the face of adversity within the industry, spanning from the bureaucracy to the current environmental crisis? Caleb, maybe I'm going to ask how you stay positive as a young career professional.
I listened to the first episode of the new podcast, and it was with Bob Brown, and he was talking about this exact thing. And he was saying that you need to focus on the issues that you can actually work on and make a difference in. There's too much going on around the country to try and fix it all at once. There's only certain problems that you can work on in your day-to-day life that actually make a difference. And You can't concern yourself with everything. So stay educated, but you might need to put some things on the shelf to give yourself the freedom to actually work on the things that you can make a difference in.
Thanks so much. Yeah, that's a really, really useful answer there, Caleb. And I'm going to end with one final question, which I might throw to, well, actually, I'll let whoever wants to answer this. What's special or unique about working for Bush Heritage that academia or the public and private sectors can't offer? Does anyone want to take that?
I'm going to go, I guess. I mean, look, academia and the public and private sectors are all good. Everyone contributes. The rising tides lifts all ships. But Bush Heritage walks the walk and talks the talk. With the organisation's about people and protecting landscapes forever. All the stuff you see out is really grounded in what we do. We're able to spend money, spend the effort to protect land, and do it in a pretty efficient and good way. We're good organisation that cares.
Thanks so much, Ben. That was a great way to finish up. I'm sorry there's some questions that weren't answered, but thank you all for your interest. And that's all we have time for today. I really want to thank you for all taking part in this event. I hope you've taken something valuable from each of our presenters and the Q&A session as they shared their experience and career paths and answered your questions. A huge thank you to Ben, Sophie, and Caleb for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to join us today, to share your personal and professional lives with us, and offering your advice and guidance. And in the spirit of Caleb's reaching out, don't feel shy, anyone on this call, to reach out to myself or any of the presenters for any thoughts, ideas, or where to next, because it helps having sounding boards and bouncing ideas off people. So we'll be sharing the recording link with you all shortly, along with a brief survey, which I'd ask you to take a moment to complete to support the future of this event. And thank you all again for taking the time to join, and have a great day.